She ate one meal a day, slept 4 hours a night, worked 18 hours straight, and every single morning, she showed up to make his life perfect, while her little boy was dying alone in a hospital bed. He had billions. She had nothing. And he had no idea. Los Angeles has a way of turning people into stone. Richard Calloway had built his empire from nothing, a boy from Compton who clawed his way to a Bel Air penthouse through decades of sacrifice, strategy, and ruthlessness. At 58, his silver-streaked hair and tailored suits told one story. His eyes told another. Cold. Calculating. Always watching. He had learned early that money didn't buy loyalty. It rented it. So he watched everyone, his executives, his attorneys, even his drivers. Trust was a luxury he'd stopped affording long ago. But the one person he'd never truly looked at was Rosa Mendez. For 7 years, Rosa had moved through his penthouse like a quiet current of air. She arrived at 6 a.m. before the city woke up. She cleaned, organized, and disappeared by 2 p.m., leaving behind gleaming countertops and perfectly folded linens. She never asked for anything, never complained, never lingered. Efficient. Invisible. Exactly what Richard preferred. Until she stopped being invisible. It started with small things he couldn't explain away. Shadows deepening beneath her eyes week by week. The way her hands trembled slightly when she carried his morning coffee. The weight falling from her frame like she was slowly being erased. And then one afternoon, hidden behind his study door, Richard saw something that cracked the glass wall around his chest. Rosa collapsed into a kitchen chair, something she had never done in 7 years, and buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent, desperate sobs. Then she pulled out her phone, stared at the screen for a long moment, and whispered what sounded like a prayer. 30 seconds later, she was back on her feet, face dry, cleaning like her world hadn't just shattered. Richard Calloway made a decision that surprised even himself. He was going to find out what was breaking her. The rain came down hard that evening as Rosa left his building. Richard followed at a distance, his blacked-out Mercedes trailing her bus through neighborhoods that grew rougher with every mile. He watched through tinted windows as the city changed around him, the gleaming towers of Bel Air giving way to the cracked sidewalks and flickering street lights of East Los Angeles. Rosa transferred buses twice. Then she walked 6 blocks alone in the rain, her small figure moving with quiet determination through streets Richard hadn't set foot on in decades. She didn't look afraid. She looked like a woman carrying something invisible and impossibly heavy. She stopped at Mercy General Hospital, a weathered building that looked like it had absorbed 30 years of grief and kept standing out of sheer stubbornness. Richard parked 2 blocks away and followed on foot, feeling absurd in his $4,000 suit. He watched Rosa speak briefly with reception, then disappear into an elevator. He waited, counted to 60, then approached the security desk. The woman who just came in, which floor? The guard barely looked up. Pediatric ICU. 5th. Pediatric. The word hit Richard like cold water to the face. A child. Somewhere in this hospital, a child was fighting for their life, and the woman who cleaned his kitchen every morning knew exactly where that child was. He took the stairs. 5th floor. The smell reached him first, antiseptic layered over something sadder and deeper, the particular grief that lives in children's hospitals. He heard her voice before he saw her. Soft and breaking, whispering in Spanish. Then he found the room, stepped to the glass partition, and stopped breathing entirely. Rosa knelt beside a small hospital bed, still wearing her work clothes, the pale blue tunic and white apron she wore in his kitchen every morning. She hadn't even stopped to change. Her hands were pressed together so tightly her knuckles had gone white, trembling against her forehead as a flood of desperate, whispered prayer poured out of her. In the bed lay a small boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old. Pale skin, light brown hair, unmistakably white. Richard stood frozen behind the glass, his mind trying to solve an equation that refused to balance. Who was this child? Why was Rosa here? And why did watching her feel like witnessing something wholly being torn apart? Richard couldn't leave. Wouldn't. He found a shadowed chair in the hallway and sat there, phone buzzing endlessly in his pocket, meetings, wire transfers, calls from people who expected the world to stop for them. He ignored every single one. 1 hour became 2. Rosa never moved from that bedside. Then a doctor entered the room, a tired woman in her 40s whose eyes held the particular weight of someone who delivered impossible news for a living. Richard shifted closer to the door, pressing into the shadows, straining to hear every word. Mrs. Mendez. The doctor's voice was gentle and heavy at once. Daniel is responding to the immunotherapy. But without the transplant, we're only buying time. You understand that. The sound Rosa made wasn't a word. It was something being torn. How long? 3 months. Maybe 4. Rosa's head dropped forward. When she spoke again, her voice came out strangled. The transplant. I'm still calling foundations, charities, anyone who will listen. The $180,000 for the procedure. I'm trying everything. I know you are, the doctor said softly. But Daniel's foster care coverage has limits. And you're already $47,000 in debt from treatments. Foster care. The words unlocked something in Richard's mind. Daniel was 7 months old when Lisa died, Rosa said, and Richard understood. She was telling a story she had told many times before, as if repetition could change the ending. Lisa was my best friend, the only real friend I had when I came to this country. She had no family. No one. I held her hand when she died. And I promised her, I swore to her, that I would protect her son. Her voice cracked completely. I couldn't adopt him. I was barely surviving 3 jobs, immigration papers not yet finalized. But I became his foster mother. I am the only mother Daniel has ever known. He calls me Mama. Richard pressed his back against the wall of that hallway, and for the first time in 30 years, felt something fracture inside his chest. Rosa worked in his home from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Then she cleaned office buildings across downtown Los Angeles from 4 p.m. until midnight. She sent every dollar to this hospital. She ate 1 meal a day. She slept 4 hours if she was lucky. And her little boy was still dying. Through the glass, Richard watched Rosa turn back to Daniel's bedside. She took his small hand gently in both of hers and whispered, "Mama's going to save you, Mijo. I promise. You just keep fighting. Keep being my brave boy." She kissed his forehead, adjusted the worn teddy bear tucked under his arm. Then she stood, straightened her spine, squared her shoulders, wiped her face, and became again the composed, invisible woman who cleaned Richard Calloway's kitchen. Richard barely reached the stairwell before she walked out. He pressed himself into the shadows, watching through the cracked door as Rosa moved toward the elevator. Back straight, face calm, carrying 7 years of quiet devastation without letting a single drop show. And Richard finally understood. Every efficient morning in his penthouse had been an act of superhuman will. She had been slowly dying, and making sure his marble floors gleamed while she did it. Richard didn't go home, didn't sleep. At 4 a.m., he was on the phone with his attorney, his accountant, and the administrator of Mercy General Hospital. He spoke quietly and moved quickly, the same focused energy he'd used to build his fortune, except this time it felt entirely different. This time it felt like it meant something. At 6 a.m., when Rosa's key turned in his front door, Richard was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting. She saw him and went pale, stumbled backward, gripping the doorframe. "Mr. Calloway, I'm so sorry. I'll start your coffee right away. Rosa, sit down. If my work hasn't been satisfactory, I can explain. My personal situation has never. I followed you to the hospital," he said quietly. "I saw Daniel." The blood drained from her face, so fast Richard thought she might faint. Her hand found the counter. "Held on. I can explain. I would never let anything affect my work. Please, I need this job. How much do you need?" She blinked, stared at him. "What?" "For Daniel's transplant. For the immunotherapy. For your medical debt." Richard's voice was steady. "Tell me the number." Rosa's mouth opened. No sound came out. $180,000 for the transplant, he continued, pulling out his phone. Another $47,000 to clear your debt. Let's make it $250,000 to cover any complications. His fingers moved across the screen. He turned it toward her. Just wired to Mercy General. Applied to Daniel Mendez's account. Transfer completes in. He glanced at his watch. 8 minutes. Rosa's legs gave out. She sank into the chair, her whole body shaking with the kind of sobs that only come after years of holding everything together alone. 7 years of exhaustion. 7 years of terror. 7 years of loving a little boy who had no one else in the world. All of it finally breaking free. When she could speak, she looked up at him through streaming tears. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this? I'm just your housekeeper." Richard felt the sting of tears in his own eyes, something he hadn't experienced in 30 years. "Because I've been living next to something extraordinary, and I was too blind to see it," he said. "You showed up every morning while your world was falling apart. You raised a child who shares none of your blood, but all of your heart. And Rosa, I have more money than I could spend in 5 lifetimes." He leaned forward. "While the strongest person I have ever met was praying for enough to save one little boy." 3 months later, Richard Calloway stood outside a hospital room at Mercy General again. But this time, what he saw through the glass made him feel something he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. Hope. Daniel was sitting up in bed, thin, still fragile, but awake. Laughing. Gesturing wildly at something Rosa was telling him, his eyes bright and dancing, the worn teddy bear propped up beside him like a small, faithful witness to everything they had survived together. The transplant had worked. Rosa saw Richard through the glass and waved him inside. He pushed open the door slowly, suddenly unsure of himself in a way that billions of dollars had never made him feel. Daniel looked up at him with wide, curious brown eyes. "Are you the man who helped my mama?" Richard knelt beside the bed, bringing himself to the boy's level. "Your mama helped me first," he said honestly. "I just didn't know it until now." Daniel considered this with the grave seriousness only a child can carry. Then he reached out and patted Richard's hand with his small, thin fingers. "Mama says you're a good man." Richard glanced at Rosa. She was standing in the corner of the room with her hand pressed to her mouth, tears running silently down her face, but she was smiling. Smiling the way you only smile when something you were terrified to hope for finally becomes real. "I'm learning to be," Richard said. He meant it. Walking out of Mercy General that evening, the Los Angeles sky burning orange and gold above him, Richard understood that something fundamental had shifted inside him. The glass partition that had separated him from Rosa's world, from real, human, aching life, had become a door. And the moment he stepped through it, he hadn't just saved a little boy. He had saved himself. Some people carry entire worlds inside them without ever asking you to notice. Look closer. The miracles are already right in front of you.